Yeah,
And
people who identify.
people will not acknowledge that victim points exist, and I think that that's ridiculous. Also, like when you try to bring this up, people are like, "Nobody's doing that," and it's like, "Oh my god, you have your hands over your
Yeah,
eyes."
yeah, and
Like,
it's Or go ahead.
Are either of you
yeah,
aware about do either of you know about the fall of Rome?
Where that it
not
fell.
particularly.
Well,
Yes, it's decadence, right? That's Camille Paglia and all that. That all of the weird obsession with like sexual.
yeah, they had a
not, like,
similar. I have a very like cursory level understanding of it, but to my knowledge, yeah, like historically, what happened with Rome is that because of their excess, people had the time, they had the luxury to obsess over these minute details and differences about their identity, about their gender, about their sex, and ironically, that came at the time at Rome's fall. Like it came as at the end of the empire, because it's a sign of the fall when, and it's like people acknowledge that, like, oh, we live in the first world. This is a first world conversation. And it so is. All of this is a first. Nobody in fucking Africa gives a shit about gender dysphoria or about trans people, any of this. None of this fucking matters because they have to survive. They have to put food on the fucking table, you know? And it's like, I think it's just a global tragedy that the most privileged people waste their mental energy on the most nonsensical things. Like all of this is basically just a giant ego stroking contest. I think it's just a bunch of people who are confused by or controlled by language.
I agree. Maybe not controlled by language. I think it is an ego thing, but I think it's an ego thing in the way that like Eckhart Tolle describes ego, which is like I actually have like a lot of empathy for these people who are like so stuck in ego because they live their whole lives completely reliant on the like others' external view of them, which is actually very sad, right?
Yeah, that's
So I don't have like this propensity to like be angry about it because I'm thinking about it in a way that's like, okay, how sad is it that these people can't that they can't just have a personality, can't have the wants that they want. Like, I mean, it's 2022. Like if you want to be a man and wear a dress and look like a girl or what is like colloquially seen as a girl, like you can do it. Like there's nothing stopping you besides, bigotry, but bigotry is going to happen no matter what, right? So it's like, it just becomes this thing when you're like forcing other people to like call you these pronouns or like forcing other people to like do all these things.
Wait, then why do you disagree that people are controlled by language? Because that's exactly the mechanism.
Because I think that people are controlled by insecurity. I think that this is a mental illness problem. Like I think that this is not necessarily mental. You're not necessarily mentally ill to like be non-binary, but to
everyone's mentally ill to some degree.
Sure, but to seek outside validation for something as like integral as your identity, like it's like extreme mental illness to me.
Yeah. I think there's an inherent desire or what would you say, a naturally evolved desire to want to be part of a struggle that is bigger than you. So like the propensity to be tribal, which is like that's just inbuilt in our nature so deep that like we see it in sports, you see it in everything. The tribe is bigger than you as an individual. And thus, when you adopt a certain identity, I'm this identity, or as an ally, which that terminology is so funny because it's a metaphor of war. Like, I'm your ally in a struggle, like a warlike struggle, a tribal war. It's like that those mechanisms that evolved to want to be part of something bigger than yourself, which was the tribe, so that you as a tribe could survive better as an individual. That mechanism is what's being active when someone wants to. Okay, I'm going to identify as this gender or whatever, or be an ally, and now I'm going to go out and fight, and I'm going to get other people to use the language that I want them to use, because it's not about just, well, let's just make it, everyone happy. It's no, this is a fight. This is a fight against oppression. That's the central theme, is its liberation of identity and whatnot. So I think there's a specific psychological mechanism that is associated with, tribalism and wanting to be something big that is being hijacked by this.
You guys are both right, but the reason I'm saying it's people controlled by language is because what you're talking about is the psychological need to be part of an in-group is being controlled by the language of gender identity, which is constantly shifting and new words are constantly being introduced into the lexicon because because
Yeah, I think that's a fair way to characterize.
of our environment. And what is our environment? Right now, we're looking at reflections on a screen of people talking that is representative of our modern day discourse. Like, people live in isolated bubbles of reality thanks to the modern internet. And this is where they form these abstract and ungrounded identities. And then the language is updated through our communications to enact that. And then when someone says, and I don't have a problem with calling someone who identifies as whatever, a female or male that's a female, as her or them or whatever, because I have a you've mentioned this, Paul, in your video. It's like, I don't have a problem with that specific person to disrespect them in that way. But,
yes, it depends on, we can go into that later, but
I think at a societal level, that is a mechanism through which to control people's thoughts and the way in which they perceive reality. Because the way in which we perceive reality is through language. Most people,
yes,
the vast majority of people, and maybe we're capable of more, but everyone thinks about things through the words that they know. So when you control
when you're isolated in these bubbles and you don't have the struggle of survival that you were talking about in terms of like, well, in Africa, where, you know, in the poorest parts of Africa where they don't have these problems, it's like, but the desire, because they're solving the problems that are in front of them. Well, the problems that are in front of the people who are terminally online is not a struggle of survival. It's a struggle of, how do I interact with this purely conceptual universe? And that conceptual universe is constructed of language, not physical objects and whatnot. So yeah, I think that's
exactly right. So it's like people are more and more concerned with more and more abstract things as the world around them is crumbling, essentially. Like, as we need people to be concerned about real things more than ever right now, I would say.